welcome to ICA in Conversation, that broadcasts twice a month, focusing on current issues and challenges in the context of compliance and counter financial crime. I'm Tim Tyler, and coming up, we're going to map out and consider the particular challenges that we face at the moment in the context of governance, risk, and compliance. To do this, I'm joined by Ros Dixon-Burnett, ICA's global lead for governance, risk, and compliance. Prior to joining the ICA, Ros has great experience in leading audit, risk, and compliance functions for various international financial services. Ros, thank you for joining us. I feel like I'm channeling my inner President Trump, talking about your great experience. But thank you for joining us. It's very good to have you with us for this conversation.
Thanks, Tim. It's great to be here.
We're going to follow the usual format of 20-minute discussion between Ros and myself, followed by the opportunity to respond to whatever questions or observations that you may have for the remaining 10 minutes. I have in front of me a feed from LinkedIn, and can I invite you over the next 20 minutes to add within the comments section any thoughts or questions that you'd like to raise. But let's jump in, Ros. Compliance professionals, let me ask this. Compliance professionals face unprecedented challenges at the moment. We're going to try and, I hope, make sense of them over the next 20 or 30 minutes. But where should we begin?
I think you're absolutely right, Tim. I think the news is full of challenges, opportunities, perhaps. Change is definitely what's on the horizon. And as compliance professionals, I think we have to be aware of what's going on, and I think we have to be on the front foot as much as we can, in terms of staying aware of what the thinking is on the global scale, also on our kind of national jurisdictional stage, what's happening in our industry. But we shouldn't be distracted from our day-to-day job, which is making sure that our particular businesses are operating in line with the regulations that are currently here, and that we are continuing to do business in the way that we intend to, and that we are delivering our firm's objectives. It just because there's fun and change and new sparkly things or things to be concerned about, things to be worried about, we have to keep our eyes kind of on the road in front of us as well. So I think it's an interesting balancing act, but it's absolutely two areas that we need to be aware of. And as senior compliance professionals, we have to manage that balance between being aware and being ready and understanding what's going on, and keeping our feet on the ground of we are doing business today right now in a regulated environment. We have to make sure that we keep doing it right in the right way, regardless of the fuss that's going on somewhere else.
So we'll try over the next 30 minutes to find the right balance between anchoring our focus in the here and now and meeting business and other requirements, whilst at the same time recognizing the fuss, as you say, or the sparkly things, the things that can grab our attention.
Yeah.
And of course, in that latter category, there is so much at the moment. We've just seen the inauguration of President Trump and his signing a plethora of presidential orders literally on the first day, many of which have a regulatory impact. What are the other sort of headline areas then? So the geopolitics, I guess, is one of them. And we can think about Mr. Trump, but there are other geopolitical moves across the world that will have an impact on our role as compliance officers. But what are the other big areas that you'd identify?
Yeah, so I think one of the other big ticket items has been here with us for a few years now is the evolution of technology. And that presents a number of opportunities and a number of risks. So within that, we would include things like cybercrime, etc., hacking, all of that kind of aspects. We would also look at potentially operational resilience, and we would also include in there artificial intelligence. And of course, what we're seeing in relation to AI is a vastly different approach to regulation or not in that space. So we're seeing, like in the UK, in the EU, we've seen the AI Act in the EU. The UK is looking a similar-ish direction. In the US, it's much more self-regulated, and we're seeing even more evidence of the intention just to promote AI and not to prevent its development, let's say. So, AI, for example, it gives us a huge number of opportunities, and there's a number of risks as well.
So let's focus on that then. We're thinking about this in the context of technology and the particular challenges that the rapid evolution of technology can present to compliance professionals. You've mentioned cybercrime and operational resilience, but we're thinking about artificial intelligence. Of course, we saw yesterday Mr. Trump announcing massive investment in artificial intelligence. And I think you picked up on the fact that he's freeing up the industry. He's saying, be free, use it, make money, in very simple terms. I don't know if that's a fair summary. So there's some interesting tensions here, and it's fair to say that some are sounding really quite dark and scary tones around this, around the potential for AI to take away jobs, to undermine society as we know it, to change the complexion of how we live from day to day. What about in the compliance space then? Is this something that we should be part of the conversation around, or is this a conversation that's going on in another part of the business?
I think it absolutely is something that we should be involved in when it comes to regulatory space. I personally don't have anything against AI when we are looking at repetitive tasks. So AI can conduct certain activities much quicker and much more accurately than a person can. And if there's vast amounts of MI to review, if there's numerous columns of data, etc., why would we not take advantage of that? I think the challenge with AI comes when we are looking at the more behavioural, ethical kind of aspects, the principles-based kind of approach that we have to take in compliance. I don't believe that AI is currently able to do that, to make those kind of decisions. I think we're a little way away from that. And I think also what we need to be really mindful of is that there is no issue with using technology or using any kind of approach, as long as we understand how it works and we understand how it comes to its conclusions. AI can in no way become some kind of black box that we blindly trust with whatever it puts out.
So I'm going to jump in there.
Absolutely.
But what if it is? But what if that is a consequence of adopting AI and the way in which we're seeing essentially an arms race around the world in this space, where businesses, multinationals, even countries are looking to be the first movers in this, in developing new technology, finding new and powerful ways to use it, then arguably there's a very real danger that we end up with a black box type solution where AI is driving change at a speed that it's very difficult for human beings to keep up with.
It will only do that if human beings blindly accept what AI is telling them.
Okay. So, So I mean, I think this is an important point, and although we haven't got time to dwell on it for too long, it's one of the challenges that we face because we aren't necessarily the decision makers within a business.
No, absolutely.
as compliance professionals, we have responsibility, we have oversight for a number of different activities and standards within the business, ensuring good governance, ensuring effective management of risk, ensuring ethical behaviour. However, as businesses are rapidly deploying artificial intelligence, we're not always sighted, we're not always close to that. What are your thoughts there, and how do we as compliance professionals manage that risk?
Just to come back on a point that you made, you said that firms are following good governance and effective risk management. For me, that doesn't marry with accepting blindly what a black box is telling me.
Okay.
I don't see how you can have effective good governance and just be accepting what you're told without challenging, or without kind of at least checking.
So our role then would be to be as involved as proportionately, as reasonable as possible in every stage of the development of this, so that we can influence that kind of development. We can mitigate against it becoming a black box solution in which we have very little immediate control.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any issue with AI doing any process or undertaking any activity as long as it's not making a final decision. And I think, that we've already seen that regulators take that view with existing technology. And I don't see that AI would be any different. The difference is that we seem to assume that we're just going to hand over our lives and our decisions and our future to AI. And I don't understand why we would do that.
Oh, that's fair. No, that's fair. But we need to move on. It feels to me that this could be a subject for a future in conversation. It's a very rich one. Several, yes. But so far we're thinking about the big ticket, to use your words, the big ticket items that will have an impact on the way we as compliance professionals are doing our business. And we've touched on technology, and you've given a number of different examples, and AI, of course, jumps out within that. Yeah. We touched briefly on geopolitics, recognising, of course, the inauguration of President Trump. What are the other areas that you'd point towards?
Outside of geopolitics?
Well, or within them.
Absolutely, because the US is not the only part
quite.
of the world, and I think that for me that what we're seeing in the US reflects a wider move across the world in a movement away from globalization. I think that it's more obvious, perhaps, through what President Trump is saying and beginning to enact. And I think that it's something that Brexit in the UK started, potentially, and that's a turn to more nationalist views. There appears to be more drawing up of the metaphorical drawbridge and each kind of country looking after itself first.
So how is that going to impact on the world in which we are working and living?
Well, I think we've started to see a move towards that more recently, but certainly prior to that, the move was definitely towards globalization, was definitely towards a global economy, a global workforce, global
supply
sales,
chains, movement.
Absolutely, yes. The introduction of
harmonization.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And so it's potentially a fundamental change, and a fundamental change to our thought process and our planning and what our strategies going forward. And I think this is something that a lot of us won't have really any control over. Yes, it will be driven by governments. I think it will be driven, by various decision makers. And I think that there's opportunities, but I think there'll also be great challenge, particularly for those entities that are multinational. I think the potential complexities brought about by these kind of nationalist movements. And I'm not saying that it's right or it's wrong. It's just this appears to be where society sentiment is going at the moment.
Yes, I can see that. And I think there's an interesting tension, because on the one hand, we see within the EU, for years, they've been driving towards a more federal approach with a harmonisation across all 27 member states. But arguably, that is one of the drivers that led to the UK stepping away from that. We're seeing individual jurisdictions, individual countries within the EU starting to make the same sorts of sounds and moves. The potential, Germany, France, Italy, Greece, potentially adopting more of a nationalist approach in the way that you describe. But there's a tension there. And in our space, and of course in the context of regulation, we know there's what some people have described as a tsunami of regulations coming from the EU. We've just seen the Digital Operational Resilience Act, DORA. It came into force last week. You've mentioned the EU AI Act. We're looking at corporate sustainability in the context of supply chain due diligence, and the list goes on.
Absolutely, yeah.
But so you've got a power block here with the EU, and the US now under President Trump, well, the indications are it's going to take a quite different approach to it. Yeah. So how does, and I'm not sure there's necessarily an easy answer to this, but how does a large multinational with a big footprint in all of those areas, how does it manage those tensions?
That is it. That is a great question. Where do you start?
I guess, what we've seen up until now with these large multinationals is that they tend to look to identify global standards that will meet all the regulatory requirements. Yes, and then they can take action locally if they need to go further and deeper in order to do that. That's been the template, hasn't it? That might need to change over time.
Yes, absolutely. And again, it will depend where their head offices are. So where they are located, where they're registered, and large organisations tend to have to take that approach. And a number of them will take the route whereby they attempt to, or they do implement best practice across their whole group. So they will, as long as there's no conflict with local regulations, they will tend to try and roll out the same policies, the same procedures, the same approaches as far as they can across all of their locations, which can cause challenge, but at the same time, it can make it slightly easier within that business.
Well, quite, because it's one business in as much as they're able to achieve that. Yeah. A quick reminder to you, wherever you're joining us, we'd love to hear your thoughts and any questions that you'd like us to consider. And you've got the opportunity to use the comments section on the LinkedIn post in order to raise those. But if I may, coming back to where you started, Ros, I think you talked about the importance of finding a balance between seeing what is or what could come on the horizon that could have an impact on the way in which we do our business, but also keeping a focus on what we're doing today, the immediate needs of the business and how that's going to be progressed. How do you find that balance?
I think it's all about identifying your different stakeholders and making sure that you understand their requirements. So also you can't ignore what's going on. I think it would be very churlish, for us as senior GRC leaders, to go into work and say, we don't need to worry about what's going on out there. Well, actually today we probably don't at a day-to-day level. I think it's right to have those open conversations. And really what you're doing is you're directing operational teams towards the day-to-day, engaging them, making sure, that they're heard. If they've got concerns, that you're absolutely talking about them. And then that we're engaging at that senior level, at the strategic part, and making sure that we're not setting hares running. Although there are presidential orders, for example, that can be made overnight, we may see that there will be market reactions to what's going on, which we will always be ready to respond to anyway, I would hope. And I think it's about maintaining a view and and an engagement at that strategic level with how is this potentially going to impact on our business? Does it actually have any impact at all? Are we in any of these markets? Are we just going to catch a side wind, as it were, rather than is it going to make any difference? And I think it's, as compliance, it's for us to help. It's for us to support the business in identifying any potential touch points.
Yes.
To your point earlier around perhaps supply chains, let's support our risk colleagues, let's support our procurement colleagues, etc. These are the things we might want to be looking at. From compliance, we would want to have a look at from a systems and controls perspective. But at the same time, I can't imagine that everything would suddenly on your risk matrix hit a really high, oh my goodness, we must do something and we must do it now. So I think it's important to remember that we want to stay embedded in the strategy.
So I'd like to give that some flesh and actually use a scenario to try and tease out some of the detail around that. Before I do, though, there are one or two questions that have now started to come through on the comments section. So thank you for those, and we will start considering those in a few moments' time. But right now, though, I want to just imagine a scenario where the business that we lead a compliance function for is a multinational business. It is coming towards the end of a period of time that there's been a great deal of investment in planning, in strategic planning, in developing clear thought around the way in which the business is going to develop in terms of its products, the markets it serves, its customer base, and so on. And as the chairman who's been leading this discussion is moving towards some kind of resolution, almost as an afterthought, they think, oh, hang on, perhaps we ought to involve a compliance function in this discussion. Now, you might have a view around that, but they come to you, the chairman comes to you and asks you for your thoughts about what is now starting to look like kind of well-developed 10-year plan. Mm-hmm. How would you address that? How would you find that balance between doing the right thing now and advising the chairman about the business plans stretching over the next 10 years?
Well, I wouldn't say that bringing compliance in right at the end is the way to do it.
Okay, so that's the first thing.
And given that that's the position that you're putting us in, I would say it should. If compliance isn't involved at the beginning, I think that given an opportunity and actually being sought out for input is the right thing. So, great. I think it's really important that compliance does not lead the business. Regulations do not come first. Regulations are important in a regulated environment. We have to make sure that we meet those requirements in order to continue doing business. But it's not that which should determine the strategy of the business, if you see what I mean.
Okay.
So I think given the opportunity, compliance is a support function. Compliance is there to ease the path of the business to achieve the strategic commercial objectives that it wishes to achieve.
So you're talking to the chairman,
mm-hmm.
And she asks you for your thoughts about the 10-year plan, and you predicate, you start off by saying, well, look, we're here to serve you and to help you meet your commercial. Yeah. But as you start to consider those plans, you realise that they are heavily dependent on supply chains
mm-hmm.
that will involve parts of the world that could
mm-hmm.
move within a sanctioned space in the next few years. And of course, it's not difficult to imagine many different parts of the world that could become subject to sanctions. So that's one area where you might provide advice around, well, there's a risk here.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
That that supply chain might be disrupted, that we might have to fundamentally move away from it, or we breach sanctions requirements, which presents a whole different range of issues.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So that's part of our role as compliance professionals, to provide that kind of advice.
Yes, absolutely. And it's not about saying no, it's about understanding the objectives, the strategic objectives that the business wish to achieve. And compliance is there to facilitate the achievement of those and, as you say, to point out the risks. You know, I can see that there's a potential obstacle in this, you know, in this sense. Have you thought about how, you know, what other alternatives? I can suggest some alternatives, but, you know, as we know, compliance is an oversight function. I mean, I had a manager once used to call me their little Jiminy Cricket. I used to be their conscience on their shoulder, and what my job was to come along and say, "Really? Okay. Are you happy with that?
Are you sure that's a good idea?"
Well, sort of,
yes.
But you know, I can absolutely see where you're going, and you know, and this is all about not being the function that says no.
Yes.
Compliance, it cannot. You know, we are past that now. You know, that's back in the olden days now. Excuse me. So we are all about facilitating the achievement of appropriate objectives. And when I mean appropriate, I don't mean that we get to decide. The regulator tells us what's appropriate or not, and our business decides which of those objectives we wish to go for. So,
okay. So I've got a really interesting question that's been raised by Simon. It highlights something that's happened in the UK. It's been in the UK news recently, where our regulator, or financial services regulator, the Financial Conduct Authority, has suggested that it will remove the requirement to have a consumer duty champion at board level. Simon observes that it seems that it would be a bold move for the board to actually take advantage of this. Any thoughts on that? Any reflection? I mean, this is early days, of course. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out. But what are your thoughts on that?
My position has always been that compliance is something that you would do anyway. In order to run a sustainable, effective business that is focused on its customers, you would choose to do a lot of what the consumer duty requires you to do. You would have already been doing what TCF required you to do.
TCF?
Sorry, treating customers fairly. That was kind of the precursor. That was back in the day when the FCA didn't think, or the FSA didn't think that the industry needed more guidance. I was internally, I've always been a little bit disappointed, a little bit upset that we needed the consumer duty, that so many firms needed that level of guidance to help them understand what they should be doing for their customers. And I think that's quite a poor reflection on the financial services industry, personally.
So what you're saying there, I'm sorry, I feel like I'm jumping in, but what you're saying there is that the reflection is that the industry wasn't able to regulate itself. It wasn't consistently adopting the right behaviours in protecting consumers, their own customers. So that the regulator felt that they needed to take action to require that.
Yeah, and you know, I understand. You know, this doesn't just stay with financial services. There's always been, you know, you talked about a tension before, and absolutely there is tension between, you know, the requirements of shareholders, the requirements of, you know, staff customers, different types of customers, etc. I don't think that removing a board champion for the consumer duty will make any difference. I think it should always have been a requirement. You know, all members of the board should be interested in customer outcomes. And I think having one individual responsible for it, I'm not sure that it makes that much difference. And I don't think it's going to make very much difference at all for individual businesses.
We're coming towards the end now, Ros. I'm going to attempt to summarise what we've covered, and in a moment I'll invite you to just make any closing observations that you'd like. Before I come to that, though, over the last 30 minutes, it's been quite a wide-ranging discussion, and we've sought to find the balance between as compliance professionals, ensuring we stay focused on the day-to-day, ensuring that we support the commercial goals of the business, but at the same time looking further down the line, anticipating the potential changes that will have an impact on the business. And we've organised those into a number of areas. We've thought about geopolitical changes and the impact that they can have. We've thought about the technological changes in particular, and we focused on artificial intelligence because candidly it's difficult not to at the moment, but of course it's not just about that. And you could argue actually that there's another element to this which we haven't talked about, and that is the way in which artificial intelligence is enabling new forms of crime, which of course needs to be part of our thought and care around how we protect our business and how we protect our consumers. However, we've thought about the big ticket items of geopolitics, technology. We've touched on regulatory change. We've touched on the way in which crime is evolving. And in doing that, we've sought to find that balance between recognizing that these things are going to have an impact, that it needs to be part of the conversation, for instance, if we're thinking about a 10-year strategic plan, but without being distracted from our core responsibility, which is here and now. We're going to bring this to a close. Any last comment from yourself before we do?
Just to kind of reiterate, replay what you've been saying, I think, you know, you can look at the news now and you can become sucked into this growing kind of energy around, all this change is coming and it's all the risks and etc. And really, it's that being able to come back to, yes, we need a view of the future. We've always had a horizon scan of the future, and that's quite right. And what matters right here, right now, is making sure that the corporate strategy that we have is being consistently delivered. You know, that we haven't stepped out of our car going down the road into the future. We're still in it. We're still going down the road, and we have to make sure that we keep looking after our customers, we keep meeting our regulatory requirements, we keep making sure that our people and our staff are focused on the now with an eye to the future.
Okay, Ros, thank you. And thank you, regardless of where you are, wherever you are in the world, thank you for joining us today for this conversation. Thank you for the questions and the observations that have been captured within the comments section on the LinkedIn post. We meet again on the second Wednesday of February, where I'll be in conversation with Matthew Field, who's the head of the Fraud Advisory Panel for the UK, and we'll be exploring the way in which fraud is mutating and the particular challenges that presents. I hope that you can join us at that time. In the meantime, take care.